The first time I realized I wasn't ready to die, I was already half buried under concrete and smoke. The second time was when I turned my head and saw him alive, standing there like the universe had cruelly chosen to give me hope I didn't deserve. "Why are you still here?" he asked, voice cold, clipped, as if my survival had somehow inconvenienced him. I wanted to laugh, scream, and cry all at once. Out of millions, it was just the two of us now. Two men who had hated each other's guts before the world collapsed. The disaster had no warning. One moment, downtown Boston was humming with morning traffic. The next, the sky split open. Some said it was an earthquake, others whispered about chemical weapons, but none of it mattered when entire buildings folded like paper. Fire bloomed in the streets, and screams became the new national anthem. All I knew was that when I opened my eyes again, everyone around me was gone. Everyone except him. His name was Nathan Cole. Tall, sharp-jawed, always carrying himself like the weight of the world belonged on his shoulders. He had been the guy who rolled his eyes every time I entered the study group, the guy who muttered useless under his breath when I asked a question too many. We had been classmates, neighbors in a way, living parallel lives in the same university town but never allies. If anything, I was the annoying shadow he couldn't shake. And now, apparently, I was the only shadow left. I dragged myself out from under a half-collapsed wall, coughing dust, clutching my side. The air was thick with the stench of burning metal, and silence pressed in from all directions, silence, except for the ragged sound of Nathan's breathing. He stood across the street, his gray hoodie streaked with soot, his knuckles raw. For a long second, he just stared at me, his eyes scanning as though trying to decide whether saving me was worth it. "You're bleeding," he said flatly. "No shit," I rasped, half laughing, half choking. "Glad to see you haven't lost your charm." The corner of his mouth twitched, not into a smile but into something closer to disdain. He walked past me without another word, his boots crunching glass, and for the first time since I woke up, I felt the heavy truth settle in. I wasn't just fighting to survive this new world. I was fighting not to lose him, too. We walked together through the wasteland that had once been Boston. Skyscrapers leaned like drunk giants, their steel ribs jutting into the sky. The air was choked with gray dust, and every step echoed like we were trespassing in a graveyard. Nathan moved with the grim efficiency of a soldier, scanning every alley, every rooftop. I followed him, limping, clutching my ribs, trying not to slow him down. He noticed anyway. "You won't last if you keep dragging your feet." "I'm not dragging," I muttered. "I'm pacing myself." "You're dead weight." The words cut sharper than the glass I'd stepped on earlier. I wanted to snap back, to remind him that I hadn't chosen this, that I wasn't just some burden he had to haul around. But the truth was undeniable. I was weaker. I always had been. And now, with death in every corner, weakness wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. Still, a part of me clung to something irrational, something raw and fragile, hope. Not just for survival, but for him. Because no matter how many times Nathan had pushed me away before, no matter how many times he made me feel small, I couldn't ignore the fact that he was all I had left. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere under that wall of ice he called a personality, he didn't want to be alone either. By nightfall, we found shelter in what used to be a library, its front half collapsed but the back still standing. The air inside was musty, filled with the smell of old pages and smoke, but it was dry and quiet. Nathan scavenged through the rubble with practiced hands, pulling out bottled water and half-crushed granola bars. I sat against a wall, my body shaking from exhaustion. He tossed a bottle to me without looking. "Drink." I did, gulping like a man who hadn't seen water in years. He sat across from me, his face half hidden in shadow, his eyes unreadable. For the first time since the world fell apart, we weren't moving, weren't running. It was just the two of us, surrounded by silence and books that would never be read again. I swallowed hard. "Do you think anyone else made it?" Nathan's jaw clenched. No, the finality in his voice sent a chill down my spine. "No, just us." I should have cried. I should have let grief swallow me whole. But instead, All I could think about was him, the way his hands moved, steady and precise, the way his voice anchored me even when it was cruel. Maybe it was madness or desperation, but sitting there in the ruins of the old world, all I wanted was to reach across the gap between us and hold on. Of course, I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I whispered, "Then I guess it's you and me." He didn't answer. He just looked at me, his eyes burning in the dim light, and for a split second, I thought I saw something soft, something vulnerable. But then it was gone, swallowed by steel. The night stretched long, filled with distant echoes of collapsing buildings and the occasional scream carried by the wind. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fire, rubble, faces I'd never see again. But when I opened them, Nathan was always there sitting by the broken window, his silhouette rigid against the dim glow of the moon, watching, guarding. And in that fragile space between horror and hope, I realized something terrifying. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted him. That was only the beginning. By the second day, hunger clawed at our stomachs, and Nathan pushed us further into the ruined city. He moved like a man who'd been preparing for this his whole life, calculating, cautious, unshaken. I trailed behind, trying to keep pace, pretending the pain in my ribs wasn't slowing me down. Every so often, he'd glance back, his gaze sharp, as if assessing whether I was still worth keeping alive. We scavenged from wrecked grocery stores, fought off feral dogs that had already turned wild, and dodged fires that still smoldered days after the disaster. It was brutal. But every time I faltered, every time my knees buckled, Nathan's hand would find my arm rough, impatient, but steady. He never let me fall. "Why do you even bother?" I snapped once, after he pulled me up from a collapsed stairwell. "If I'm such a nuisance, why don't you just leave me behind?" His eyes flickered, and for the first time, I heard something like anger break through his calm. "Because I don't leave people behind." It was such a simple answer. Cold, clipped, but it made my chest ache in ways I couldn't name. Because maybe, deep down, it wasn't just duty keeping me alive. Maybe it was him. By the third day, silence no longer felt like safety. It was too heavy, too absolute, broken only by the distant crash of falling debris. If the world had once been a song, now it was just an empty hum. Nathan walked ahead with that same purposeful stride, his shoulders squared as if he could will the ground to stay steady. I stumbled behind, clutching the straps of a scavenged backpack. Inside was nothing more than a couple of stale crackers and half a bottle of water, but it felt like treasure in a world stripped bare. At one point, my shoe caught on twisted metal, and I fell hard to my knees. Pain flared up my leg, and I let out a hiss. Nathan stopped. His head turned, his eyes narrowing. For a long second, he said nothing, only studied me like I was a problem to solve. Then he crouched, reached into his pack, and tossed me a strip of cloth. "Wrap your ankle." I blinked at him, surprised. You noticed." His jaw tightened. "You're limping loud enough to draw a parade." I wanted to snap at him, tell him he could just leave me if I was such a liability, but instead, my hands shook as I tied the makeshift bandage. His presence beside me, close enough to feel his body heat even in the cold wind, was both grounding and unbearable. When I finished, he stood and walked on without waiting. That was Nathan Cole. Never soft, never tender, but always there. By evening, the sky had turned a bruised purple, and the city looked like a battlefield abandoned centuries ago. Fires glowed faintly in the distance, and the skeletal remains of towers clawed at the clouds. We found shelter in an abandoned subway station, the entrance half buried in rubble. The air inside was damp, the walls cracked, but it was hidden. Nathan lit a fire with scavenged newspapers, his movements efficient, practiced. I sat near him, hugging my knees. The warmth licked at my face, a fragile reprieve in the chaos. For a long time, we sat in silence, the fire popping softly between us. Finally, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. "Do you think anyone will come for us? Rescue teams? The government?" Nathan's face was unreadable in the firelight. "If they could, they would have been here already." "So, It's really just us. Just us, he confirmed, his voice low. The words should have crushed me. Instead, they burned into me, sparking something dangerous and desperate. Just us. Alone, together, in the hollowed-out remains of the world. I should have been afraid of the loneliness. But what terrified me more was how much I wanted to close the space between us. Days bled into each other. Hunger gnawed constantly, and thirst was worse. We scavenged what we could: canned beans, stale bread, a half-broken water filter from a camping store. At night, we huddled close to fires, speaking little. Nathan always kept watch longer than he should, his eyes scanning shadows, his hand never far from the rusted pipe he'd taken as a weapon. Sometimes, when he thought I was asleep, I watched him. The way his expression softened when he thought no one was looking. The way his chest rose and fell, steady and sure. In the silence of a broken world, he was the only constant, the only proof that I wasn't completely alone. But he still treated me like I was fragile glass. Or worse, a burden he had no choice but to carry. "You don't have to look after me," I told him one night, my voice breaking. "I can take care of myself." He didn't look up from sharpening the pipe. "You wouldn't have lasted a day without me." "Then why not leave me?" I whispered. That made him pause. For the first time, he raised his eyes and looked at me fully, the firelight flickering in his gaze. Something sharp and pained crossed his face, something that almost looked like anger but wasn't. "I told you before," he said softly. "I don't leave people behind." I swallowed hard. "Even if that person annoys the hell out of you?" His lips twitched, the barest shadow of a smirk. "Especially then." It was the closest thing to warmth I'd ever heard from him, and it was enough to set my chest ablaze. One morning, we found a stretch of road still intact, its cracked asphalt lined with abandoned cars. The silence there was suffocating. Doors were left hanging open, windows smashed. Some vehicles still had luggage inside, clothes scattered like people had fled in a rush. I trailed my fingers along a child's backpack lying in the dirt. It was pink with faded cartoon stickers. My throat tightened. Nathan's voice cut through the air. "Don't look too long. You'll lose yourself." I turned to him. "Doesn't it bother you? All this? Everyone?" His expression hardened, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Of course it does. But being haunted won't keep you alive." I wanted to argue, to tell him that remembering was all I had left. But when I saw the set of his jaw, the exhaustion carved into his features, I bit back the words. Maybe forgetting was the only way he knew how to survive. We kept walking. Hours later, when the sky turned gray with rain, Nathan slowed. He lifted his hand, motioning me to stop. I froze, my pulse racing. Then I heard it, two faint footsteps echoing ahead. Not ours. My heart leapt. Someone else? Nathan's face darkened. "Stay behind me." We crept forward, our breaths shallow. And then we saw them. Two men, ragged and wild-eyed, digging through the trunk of a car. Their clothes were torn, their faces smeared with dirt. When they noticed us, their eyes lit up not with relief, but with hunger. Nathan shifted instantly, stepping in front of me, pipe in hand. One of the men grinned, his teeth jagged. "Well, look at that. Fresh meat." Fear knotted in my gut. My hands shook, but Nathan didn't move an inch. His voice was steel. "We don't want trouble. Walk away." The men laughed. One pulled a knife from his belt. "We're all trouble now." What happened next was chaos. They lunged, and Nathan met them head-on, his movements sharp and precise. The pipe clashed against the knife, sparks flying. The second man circled, eyes on me, and panic surged in my veins. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a broken car antenna, and swung wildly. Connected with his shoulder, and he staggered back, cursing. My pulse thundered. Nathan fought like a man possessed, his face grim, every move efficient. He disarmed the first man with a brutal twist, sending the knife skittering across the ground. The second man, seeing his chance fade, spat and bolted into the ruins. The other followed, limping, leaving us standing there in the rain, gasping. My chest heaved. My ankle throbbed. My hands shook violently, still clutching the antenna. Nathan dropped the pipe, his own breaths ragged, and turned to me. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice sharper than the rain pelting us. I'm fine," I stammered. But he was already stepping closer, his hands hovering like he wanted to check me for wounds, but didn't dare touch. For a second, the storm of the world fell silent, and all I could hear was his breath mingling with mine. I whispered, "You protected me." His jaw clenched, his eyes flicked away. Don't read into it, but I already had. Because in that moment, with the rain pouring down and the world collapsing around us, I knew the truth. No matter how cold his words, no matter how distant he tried to be, Nathan needed me just as much as I needed him. And maybe, just maybe, there was something more between us than survival. The rain didn't stop for 3 days. It soaked through our clothes, turned the ground into slick mud, and carved rivers down the broken streets. We scavenged under gray skies, shivering, our shoes squelching with every step. Nathan never complained, never did, but I caught the way his shoulders hunched against the cold, the way his fingers stiffened as he gripped the pipe that had saved us. By the second night, I could barely stop my teeth from chattering. We'd found shelter in the back of a collapsed diner, the roof mostly intact, the air heavy with mildew. Nathan built a small fire with broken chairs and splintered wood, but the flames did little to chase away the damp. I sat as close as I dared, hugging myself, wishing for a blanket, for warmth, for anything. Nathan sat across from me, staring into the flames, his jaw tense. When I finally whispered, "I can't stop shaking," I wasn't expecting him to react. But then he moved. He shifted across the space, his body lowering beside mine. Without a word, he draped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me against him. Heat radiated off his chest, steady, solid. I froze at first, too stunned to breathe, but then instinct took over. I leaned in. I let myself feel Ithis' warmth, his strength, the faint smell of rain and smoke clinging to him. "You'll freeze if you don't conserve heat," he muttered. His voice was gruff, defensive, as though he had to excuse his own tenderness. Still, I couldn't stop the way my heart raced, couldn't stop the quiet words that slipped out. "Thanks, Nathan." He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away either. That night, I slept pressed against him, listening to the steady beat of his heart under the ruins of the world. And for the first time since everything ended, I dreamed of something other than fire and death. By the time the rain broke, the city smelled of rot and gasoline. Fires still smoldered in some corners, and the air was thick with decay. We kept moving, always searching for food, for shelter, for something that would tell us we weren't the last remnants of humanity. But the world was empty. Every gas station we passed had been stripped bare. Every house stood gutted, windows shattered, doors swinging open in the wind. Sometimes, we saw traces of Othursa burned-out campfire, footprints in the mud but never faces, never voices. And in that endless silence, Nathan and I became our own fragile universe. He taught me how to swing the pipe without losing balance, how to spot signs of weakness in abandoned buildings before stepping inside. I stumbled through his lessons, awkward and clumsy, but he never let me fail entirely. Whenever I fell, he pulled me up. Whenever I froze, he steadied me. I, in turn, tried to keep him human. I asked questions, even when he groaned at them. I told him stupid jokes, even when his only response was a roll of the eyes. Sometimes, just sometimes, his lips twitched, and I swore I saw a ghost of a smile. One afternoon, as we rested in the husk of a church, sunlight streaming through shattered stained-glass windows, I caught him staring at me. "What?" I asked, half nervous, half hopeful. He blinked, looked away quickly. "You've gotten quieter. Is that a bad thing?" His pause was telling. "No," I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You're impossible, you know that?" His eyes flicked back to mine, and for a heartbeat, the weight of his gaze nearly unraveled me. I wanted to close the space, to reach out, to press my lips to the mouth that always spoke so coldly. But fear rooted me in place, fear of rejection, of breaking the fragile bond we'd built. So I said nothing. And Nathan, as always, stayed silent too. The first time we found a corpse, it shattered me. We'd entered a supermarket, its shelves stripped bare, when I saw him. A man slumped against the wall, skin gray, eyes glassy. He couldn't have been dead more than a week. A bottle of water sat empty beside him, his hand still clutching the strap of a backpack. My chest tightened. My knees buckled. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. Nathan's hand was suddenly at my back, steadying me. His voice was low, calm, unyielding. Don't look too long. But I couldn't stop. The man's face blurred into every stranger I'd ever passed on the street, every friend I hadn't said goodbye to. Tears stung my eyes, hot and unrelenting. He was just alone, I whispered. Nathan's grip on my shoulder tightened. So are we. I turned, choking on the words. No, we're not. Not as long as, but my voice broke. The truth too dangerous to finish. Nathan's gaze burned into me, sharp and unreadable. Then, slowly, he pulled me closer, his hand sliding from my shoulder to the back of my neck. He pressed his forehead against mine, and for a moment, I forgot the world had ended. Breathe, he murmured. Just breathe. So I did. With him anchoring me, I breathed. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, listening to Nathan's steady breaths as he dozed near the fire. Every time the flames flickered across his face, my chest tightened. He was beautiful, even in ruin-sharp lines softened by exhaustion, his usually guarded features at rest. And I hated myself for wanting more than survival, for wanting him, because no matter how many times he pulled me back from the brink, no matter how many moments of warmth broke through his walls, Nathan still kept me at arm's length. He still looked at me like I was fragile, temporary, disposable. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop imagining what it would be like if the world hadn't ended, if we'd met in another life, in another story. If we'd been allowed to just be boys, not survivors. If I could have loved him openly, without fear, without rubble between us. I turned onto my side, whispering into the dark, words I would never let him hear. I love you. The confession vanished into the silence, swallowed by ash and shadows. And still I held on. We kept moving, deeper into the ruins, chasing the faintest rumors of hope. Sometimes we found old emergency posters, promising evacuation centers that no longer existed. Sometimes we followed trails of footprints that led to nothing but emptiness. But no matter how far we walked, it was always the same. Just Nathan and me, two ghosts wandering a world that no longer cared. And yet, every time his hand brushed mine by accident, every time his eyes softened for a fraction of a second, I knew the truth. Even if the world had ended, my heart had only just begun. The farther we walked, the quieter Nathan became. Not that he was ever talkative, but now even the little words he used, sharp instructions, brief reassurances, faded into silence. I followed him, day after day, feeling the weight of the unspoken grow heavier between us. It wasn't just hunger anymore. It wasn't just thirst. It was something deeper, something that gnawed at my chest every time I looked at him and remembered how easily he could have left me behind. But he hadn't, and I needed to know why. We reached the edge of the city on the 6th week. Beyond the rubble, the land stretched wide and barren, dotted with the skeletal remains of suburbs. Houses caved in on themselves, playgrounds rusted and empty. The world had gone silent, but out here, the silence was deafening. Nathan led us into one of the abandoned Husisa two-story shell with its windows blown out and weeds crawling through the cracks in the walls. We found a dusty couch still intact, and for the first time in days we sat. I couldn't hold it in any longer. Why me? I asked. My voice trembled, but I didn't care. Why are you still with me, Nathan? You could have left. You should have left. I slow you down. I make mistakes. Stop. His tone was sharp, cutting through my spiraling words. But I didn't stop. My chest ached too much. No. Tell me the truth. Am I just some burden you've decided to carry until I break? Am I just dead weight you're too stubborn to cut loose? His hands clenched, veins standing out against his skin. For a long time he didn't look at me. Then, slowly, his eyes lifted dark, burning, unguarded for the first time. You think I'd still be here if I didn't need you? The words hit me like a blow. You need me? I whispered. Nathan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice raw. I thought being strong meant carrying everything alone. That's what I did before. That's what I tried to do after the world fell apart. But then there was you. Annoying, stubborn, too damn fragile for your own good, and somehow you kept standing. Somehow you kept following me. Every time I thought about giving up, I'd hear your voice behind me, asking some stupid question or laughing at your own bad joke. And I realized, if you could still keep going, then so could I. His voice cracked, just barely. You're not dead weight. You're the only reason I haven't lost myself. Tears blurred my vision, hot and uncontrollable. My throat ached with all the words I had swallowed for weeks, but they surged out now, unstoppable. I love you, Nathan. The silence after was unbearable. My heart hammered as though it wanted to escape my chest, as though the ruins themselves were holding their breath. Nathan's jaw tightened, his eyes closing for a moment. When he opened them, there was no ice left, only something raw, vulnerable, terrifying in its honesty. I know, he whispered. Then softer, I love you too. The world tilted. My lungs forgot how to breathe. And then his hand was on the back of my neck, pulling me forward, and his lips crashed against mine. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate, hungry. The kiss of two men who had survived too much and couldn't afford to waste another second. I clutched at him, my fingers tangling in his shirt, pulling him closer as if the world could still take him away if I let go. When we broke apart, our foreheads rested together, our breaths ragged. I thought you hated me, I whispered. His lips curved, the faintest trace of a smile. I thought so too. Turns out, I just hated how much I cared. I laughed, choked and broken, but real. For the first time since the disaster, the ruins didn't feel like a graveyard. They felt like a beginning. The days after our confession didn't get easier. Hunger still clawed, thirst still burned, and danger still lurked in every shadow. But something had shifted. We no longer walked as two survivors bound by necessity. We walked as one. His hand would brush mine as we trudged down empty highways. At night, we slept pressed together, not just for warmth, but because we couldn't bear the space between us. And in the quiet moments when he'd catch me staring and mutter, "What?" with that faint smirk, or when I'd rest my head against his shoulder and feel him exhale softly, I realized that love had given us something even survival couldn't: hope. One evening, after weeks of wandering, we climbed to the roof of a crumbling building to watch the sun set. The sky was painted with streaks of gold and crimson, the first beauty we'd seen in what felt like forever. Nathan stood beside me, his arm brushing mine. Do you think it'll ever get better? I asked. He was quiet for a long time, then finally said, maybe not the world, but us. We will. I turned, my chest swelling, and for once, I didn't hold back. I leaned in and kissed him again, slower this time, gentler, letting the ruins witness what they couldn't destroy. The sun dipped lower, and the shadows stretched, but for the first time since the disaster, I wasn't afraid of the darkness. Because I wasn't alone. Because in the end, love had survived too. And so, in the ashes of the old world, we built something new. Not with walls or cities, but with each other. Every step forward was a promise. Every touch a vow. We were just two men, broken but alive, carrying the weight of everything we'd lost. But together we were enough. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only miracle we needed. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.